Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger with our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is April 4th, 2022, and we're in the midst of extremely fast-moving events on both the broad strategic front and including on the economic front, with some very significant moves toward a realignment. And we'll take up all of these topics. And I think what we should start with is this disgusting performance of the European Union at the European Union-China summit. You were interviewed by CGN to discuss some of the background to this, but Helga, what's the EU trying to do with China?
Well, it's good that the dialogue took place because, if there's anybody who can get reason into the EU, it's probably China, because I think contrary to the performance, and show and so forth, the European Union is in no position to really cut relations with China unless they want to completely uh, accelerate the economic demise of all of Europe. So they wanted arrogantly to only make the Ukraine issue the main topic on the agenda. Naturally, China was not interested to discuss only that. But I think, the effort to get China into a mediation role is actually not a bad idea at all. However, not exactly the way the EU uh, was thinking about it, basically by trying to cut the relationship between Russia and China, which I think is a futile effort. What I said in the interview with CGTN is something different, namely that there is one conception which Chinese President Xi Jinping has promoted, which is absolutely suitable to play such a mediation role, and that is the idea of a shared community of the one future of humanity, which is a concept which has been articulated by Xi Jinping many times. And it is the idea that we are one humanity, that we have one future, and either we settle our accounts in a peaceful way or we don't exist. And this is in times of acute war danger, even World War III danger, a very important concept. Because, obviously, either you use Ukraine as a tool, as an instrument to weaken Russia. This has been promoted by Brzezinski for a long time, who said, with Ukraine, Russia is a superpower, but without Ukraine, it's just a mediocre regional power. And obviously, either you use Ukraine, and right now it's being used basically, not by Russia, but by NATO, keeping up the sanctions and pushing Russia against the wall, so that the idea that we must find as quickly as possible a way out of this, and therefore to have an international security architecture which would include every single planet, a country on the planet, is the subject of our upcoming conference on the 9th of April. And that fits exactly with the idea of the shared community of the one mankind. Namely, that if we would say that we have an international security architecture which includes every country, including Russia and China, then you would have to have an economic policy which would be the underpinning of that, by Europe and the United States joining with the Belt and Road Initiative, which makes a lot of sense because we have a lot of very pressing issue: world famine, pandemic not over, new pandemics looming, poverty increasing. So it would make absolutely sense that we stop this geopolitical game, and that we integrate the Eurasian continent economically, that we develop together Latin America and Africa, and really devote our efforts to the common aims of mankind. Now, in that case, the Ukraine would not be an instrument of geopolitical contention, but it would be the bridge between Europe and the rest of the Eurasian continent. And I think that is the conception which we absolutely should promote.
Well, and that is exactly what fits in with this whole idea of the extension of the Silk Road, which became the China policy in 2013. I think just to go back on one point you were discussing, the effect of the sanctions policy, which was supposed to bring Russia to its knees, it's actually creating a backlash against the dollar system. And you have a number of examples of this. For example, Lavrov in India talking about the ruble rupee relationship. What can you say about that?
Yeah, as you say, and there are some people noting the fact that the aggressive push of sanctions and stealing assets, of Afghanistan, now of Russia. I mean, that's, by the way, nobody mentions anymore that the United States has and the Europeans have basically confiscated more than 300 billion dollar worth of Russia's foreign assets. And naturally, every country in the world now has to consider that if you have your assets in dollar and euro, they are not safe. So there is a massive push towards building a new financial system, rupee, ruble, renminbi, and other national currencies are used for trade among countries. And this is clearly very quickly going in the direction of setting up a new financial system. Naturally, nobody can want that either, because if you have a total decoupling of the dollar eurozone from the other countries, well, that would be very much to the detriment of the West, because the Western values are unfortunately a lot in monetarist values, while Russia, China, and the countries who work with the BRI are much more focused on physical values and physical investments. So while it would be painful for everybody, I think the West would suffer by far the most.
Now, among the other aspects of this, you have the question that came up of Putin's insistence that now gas and oil be paid for in rubles rather than any other currency. The original deadline was yesterday. It looks as though there's a slight extension, but uh, what is where do you think this is going? I mean, the European Union so far has refused to do it. This will have extraordinary consequences on German industry, as we've heard from BASF and Siemens. Why is Europe being so stubborn on this?
Because, frankly, I think they have lost touch with reality. I think they are sitting in their bubble. I think they are full of themselves. They are arrogant. They think they are better. They think their rules-based order is superior to the values of other cultures, which is being perceived by many other cultures in the world as absolute arrogance of a Eurocentric world outlook. And it's not in touch with reality. I mean, it's not exactly. I mean, what Putin has set up is that Gazprom bank, that people can still go to that bank, pay with their Western currencies, exchange them in ruble, and then pay for the gas in ruble. Now, the EU is even refusing that, at least so far. They say they will. And, if, I mean, even Habeck, who's, a green economic minister, which should be an exclusive combination. I mean, one excluding the other, but unfortunately, it's not. Uh, so even he has warned that that Germany cannot totally separate from the import of Russian gas. But there is an absolute mania among some people who insist that Germany should cut its dependence on Russian gas. Naturally, the U.S. and the British are putting maximum pressure on Germany and Europe to this effect. But as you say, that there are people alarmed what this would do. I mean, we are already in a terrible crisis on top of the pandemic, which had severe in impacts. if you now have this cutting off sanctions, cutting off gas imports because of the sanctions, the gas prices and energy prices, food prices, everything is already going through the roof. So the CEO of BASF, Brudermüller, said, that we are looking at the total collapse of the German economy, that especially the small and medium-sized firms would, many of them would not make it. Similar warnings are coming from Siemens Energy. And I think that we are really looking at the danger of a collapse of Europe if these policies are not being reversed. I mean, already now, since 2000, the part of the EU in the global GDP has collapsed from 26% to only 18%. And if these policies are being pursued, we could see a real collapse into social chaos, into a absolute poverty, social unrest, and it's just an insane policy. So we are trying to really counter that because this it's so much against the German interest and against the European interest, especially because it comes in a situation where, due to the sanctions, already now the people who are in danger of starvation this year, with the pandemic, it rose to 200 million. And as a Chinese economist from the Chongyang Finance Institute just noted, with the sanctions, it's now going up to 1 billion people who are faced with starvation this year. And then you have the green lobby pushing, no food increase, no increase in the food production, like the Potsdam Institute for Climate Follow Consequences, or whatever it's called. They say, no, we should not increase the food production. We should stop feeding grain to animals. We should not produce meat anymore. I mean, this is a green, Malthusian policy, which should be firmly rejected. And, the economist from Russia, who is now a minister of the Eurasian Economic Union, Sergei Glaziev, correctly noted a few days ago that the world could easily produce food for 20 billion people, which is more than double of the people we have now. And I think that is exactly the right way to go. We have to double food production, because why should anybody starve to death if we could easily remedy it? So, I think this hypocrisy must stop, accusing Russia, China, and everybody else of human rights violation when the very economic policies are pushed by these institutes, really mean mass death and mass famine.
One note on that is the situation in the United Kingdom. Inflation and food prices there are up higher than the rest of Europe. Butter costs are going up 30% next week. It's going to cost an extra 850 euros per year per family. That's the initial estimate. And the British are taking the lead against the paying in rubles. They've already sanctioned Gazprom Bank. I think they're the only country so far that has done that. And Peskov, the spokesman for Putin, said yesterday that the British are in the lead of the anti-Russian policy. Now, on the overall move toward regime change, there are interesting developments in the last days in Pakistan with the operation against Imran Khan, also in India. But let's start with Pakistan, Helga. What's the latest there?
Yeah, that's quite amazing. And I have not read anything in the German media about it, but it is quite a scandal. Imran Khan has sent a démarche to the U.S. embassy about the fact that one Pakistani ambassador in another country, I don't know which one, was told officially in a formal meeting by representatives of the United States that they should get rid of Imran Khan, or else Pakistan would suffer horrific consequences. Now, this is quite incredible, quite blatant. And Imran Khan, basically reminded people that this is not the first time that unfriendly countries, which are now clear which one it is, have gotten rid of a Pakistani prime minister, referring to Ali Bhutto. And also, there were some other cases where the demise of the president, respectively prime minister, was very dubious. So this is incredible. What did Pakistan do? All they did is they refused to take sides in the Ukraine crisis. They said they don't want to be put into a geopolitical confrontation, and even offered to mediate between the United States and China. So I think this is quite something. And Imran Khan said that these people are corrupt. Uh, they are paid from abroad. So I don't think we have seen the end of it. There is a vote of no confidence this weekend, and we should be very alerted what comes out of this.
As for the threats against India, Dalip Singh, who's one of the State Department officials in charge of the sanctions against Russia, was in India at the same time Lavrov was meeting with the Indians. And he said in a friendly discussion, he told them they must not help Russia in any way or face consequences. Now, you mentioned earlier to me that there was a meeting in Berlin of discussing regime change in Russia. Of course, we had Biden's comments last weekend that Putin must go. What was this Berlin meeting about?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, this is being promoted by Deutschlandfunk. Apparently, this was co-sponsored by this Center for Modern Liberal Modernity, or whatever it's called. It's basically a follow-up think tank of the Green think tank, the Böll Stiftung. And they had a meeting there with quite a number of Bundestag parliamentarians, Michael Roth from the SPD, Roderich Kiesewetter, CDU, CSU, and Strack-Zimmermann from the FDP. And they were openly saying, that basically it was an open advertisement for regime change against Putin, basically by instigating and discussing how the uh, business establishment of Russia should be encouraged to break with Putin. And it's really incredible. These are institutions. I mean, at least the Munich Security Conference and the Deutschlandfunk. They are pretty much close to the government, or official. And for them to engage in this is just increasing the very bad, already non-existent relation between Russia and Germany. And it's part of building an atmosphere towards war. If these people don't understand that, they're not in the real world.
And the fact that this was not widely reported is interesting because the Pope made a statement the other day, which was a fairly strong statement against the continued buildup in arms, and that was blacked out, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is incredible. The Pope, in a contradiction to what had come out of the Vatican earlier, which basically, towed the line on the official narrative on the Ukraine, the Pope made a very dramatic statement, blasting the decision to increase the spending on weapons to 2% of the GDP, saying that the investments in weapons and sanctions is absolutely not leading to peace. And he said what it does, it blackens the soul, the hearts, and all of humanity. And it is crazy. He called it crazy. Now, there was only a mentioning in a few, tiny notes here and there. But if you think, that the Pope is, after all, the spiritual head of the Catholic Church, which is 1.2 billion people, and that there was no mention of that, that shows you, about freedom of the press. If you have any opinion which doesn't go in the direction of, the war policy, you get clicked out, even if you are the Pope. And I think all Catholics of the world should really make it an effort to find these words of the Pope and take them to heart if they don't want their heart to be blackened, as the Pope says.
Helga, you already mentioned earlier the increase in hunger that's coming from the effects of the sanctions, the likelihood that there will be smaller harvests in Ukraine. Shipping is blocked up. Now, in this context, the situation in Afghanistan has still not been resolved. In general, the Western countries are doing nothing, if little, if anything, to alleviate the humanitarian crisis there. But there was a conference, I believe, in Beijing, which included a very significant pledge from China, also working with the OIC. What came out of that conference?
This conference was in Anhui, in a beautiful province of China, and it was with the neighboring countries of Afghanistan. And Lavrov was there. He met with Wang Yi, but also, they had a 2-day conference discussing, setting up humanitarian aid and especially economic buildup of Afghanistan. So this is very important. And, I think there was a big delegation of the Taliban, the acting Prime Minister Baradar and the Foreign Minister Mutaki. They praised the Afghanistan-Chinese relations, and I think that is the only real serious effort. And the Taliban also said that China is the only country which is approaching the crisis with a serious economic policy. So this is very good. Before that, you had in Islamabad a conference between the OIC and Afghanistan on Afghanistan. And the OIC is stressing that their relationship to China is improving a lot, and that they want to work together to tackle all kinds of problems. So as you can see, you have right now a complete realignment, and this is what neither the United States nor the Europeans really realize, that their policies are pushing the rest of the world to realign, to act together for development, because they don't want to have this war policy. So you have right now a realignment of Russia, China, and India. This was, basically not intended, because they wanted to put in India in the Quad, in the Indo-Pacific global NATO. India wants to stay neutral and work with Russia and China. This is a big breakthrough which occurred. And naturally, you have the development of a new system. It's not yet done and takes some steps, but based on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS, then the RIC countries will have another summit this year, Russia, India, China. And the global south in general is orientating towards that combination, which offers infrastructure investment and economic development. And I can only say, the Europeans and the United States should really rethink. Is there not somebody who understands that if you go for a confrontation to try to suppress the rise of China, which is not possible. It's 1.4 billion people, plus now the relationship between Russia and China, between China and India, which is another 1.4 billion people. Now, that is the majority of mankind right now going in another direction. And the United States and Europe would do so much better if they would say, we just stop the geopolitical confrontation and we cooperate, because we have so many problems to solve. If you consider that there is 1 billion out of 8 which are threatened with starvation this year, this should really be a reason to say we have to change the policy. And naturally, we need a world health system. We need to combat poverty. We have so many joint problems, and I think that there must be a different approach.
On this realignment question, it was quite interesting that with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, welcomed in Delhi for talks this weekend, at the same time, a British delegation of parliamentarians which was planning on coming, was told not to come. And so you see this potential for a shift, which is, I think, a perfect way to discuss what we're going to be doing next Saturday, April 9th. The Schiller Institute Conference will be taking up the convening of an event to discuss the change to a new security and financial architecture. Helga, why don't you give our viewers a sense of what to expect from this? And of course, everyone should register for this and organize for it. But since you're the main organizer, why don't you give people a sense of what we're going to be doing?
This coming conference on April 9th is probably the most important conference the Schiller Institute has done ever, or for a very long time, because people know that the world is on the verge of World War III. Many people are really scared that we could have a third world war. And therefore, what the conference concentrates on is to conduct very soon an international conference in the spirit of the Peace of Westphalia, to have an international security architecture which takes care of the interest of every single country on the planet. This naturally must go along with the establishment of a new world economic order. We are on the verge of a collapse of the transatlantic financial system, and we have to have a new Bretton Woods system, a credit policy which allows to invest in long-term investment for the development of the developing sector to overcome poverty and underdevelopment forever. Because of a combination of factors, the sanctions, previously the pandemic, we are now faced with the danger of 1 billion people dying of hunger this year. That is 1 out of 8 billion people in danger, and we must reverse policy. So we are going to assemble an extraordinary combination of speakers from Russia, from China, from the United States, from India, from Africa, from Latin America, from Europe. And you absolutely should join this conference and organize for it, because it's the only place where productive and positive solutions are being offered. And if you look at the combination of people who will speak, you can see that this is not just nice words, but we are serious in trying to get a coalition together to put on the agenda of the world a new paradigm, one which allows the survival of all of mankind.
And you can find the registration form for that at theschillerinstitute.com. You'll also find a very important document of a proposal, the LaRouche proposal for the change to economic financial architecture, which goes through in some depth the shift from a funny money collapsing system into physical economy. So that's all available at theschillerinstitute.com. Helga, is there anything else you want to add at this point?
Yes, you should look at the press release, which we will publish probably later today, and get that press release about the upcoming conference around as widely as you can.